This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Kiah Penfield for the first time. Welcome to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
I am doing pretty good. How are you?
Doing really well. For those who don't know, we're a featured podcast on Newsly. You can see the icon up there. It says "Listen" on Newsly. And for those of you who are listening or watching, you can use that coupon code of Ghost to get a free month of that platform. We are a featured podcast on that platform later tonight. The audio only version of the podcast will be on Newsly. We like to let people know that. Also, for those of you who are listening or watching, we're actually at episode 1020, tracking on Apple Podcasts since 2016, and to let people know. And then we've got your link here, Linktree, Kiah Penfield, and that'll be fully clickable when we're published, and people can check that out. And tonight we're going to talk about mental health and surviving depression, and in relation to all the things you do as a mental health advocate, teacher, musician, camp counselor, true crime podcaster. So you got a lot of hats. We can get through all of it because we're going to talk for about an hour. And maybe just introduce yourself and give you a little bit of brief story to the audience. And we can start from there.
Yeah, so my name's Kiah Penfield. Right now, I am a deaf educator, as well as all the other titles that got shared. So I do definitely wear a lot of hats. I got diagnosed with depression when I was 14, although, hindsight's 2020, probably have had it for quite a while before then. First signs were shown kind of at age 3 with some pretty severe insomnia, which is, exactly the age you want your depression to start up. I'm also a former military kid, current veteran's wife. My wife has PTSD, so we've got a lot of, mental health issues feels like the wrong word, but a lot of mental health conditions in the family. And so one of my life goals is in everything I do, wherever I can, to kind of advocate for mental health and make sure people know that, you can still have a really good life with mental illness, and also there's life after mental illness.
Yeah, it's important to understand. A lot of times in healthcare, I feel like the way the system works in America, that they don't treat their mental health the same as your physical health. That a lot of times the plans you have don't treat it like if you had a heart disease or you have diabetes, like you don't only get 12 visits to your mental health professional. Some plans don't have full coverage, and it's a real issue. My daughter has gone through it, and my wife has gone through it, and we've been kind of living in the world of the current medical system. They have to go to outside advocates because sometimes it seems like our system doesn't really support it as a real issue, or don't
Absolutely.
treat it with the same weight of diabetes or cancer, and it can take you out of here just as bad as cancer or anything else. I've had to deal with issues with my daughter and my wife, and it's significant. So yeah, I'm glad that you're an advocate for this, because I think it's not being represented as much as it needs to be.
Yeah, I think when you talk about comparing like mental health to physical health, I think of like urgent cares. So, if you break your fingers, I broke my fingers at the beginning of COVID. It was really an awful day because they shut down the schools. I lost my job and I broke my fingers all on the same day. But, I broke my fingers and I could go to urgent care and get care for it there. Whereas at the same time, I've had situations where like I've run out of my mental health meds and haven't been able to get through to a doctor to get a prescription written. And like, should I have been taking better care of like managing my medication? Yeah, I totally should have. But at the same time, we have these urgent cares for a reason. There's nowhere that you can go. And a lot of places will not write you a prescription if you're not a long-term patient. I live in the Seattle area, closer to Everett, actually, Everett, Washington. And they did open for the first time. They have like a mental health urgent care, which is really fantastic. But
wow.
Also super overworked, right? And I think of like, and like the wait list to get into therapy, to see a psychiatrist, like by the time most people are realizing they need help, they kind of need it right now. They don't need it
right
5
then.
months from now.
Yeah, 5 months from now it's not good enough. Like if you find out that you have cancer, they'll put you in. I actually was a cancer survivor at 27.
Wow.
had an assessment, and then boom, they found it, and I was in surgery within like 4 or 5 days of
Yeah, I
finding it.
can't imagine.
They treat it that quick. They win. An oncologist, they're all boom, they're on it.
Yeah,
But
it's
it's
hard
like,
to imagine that.
yeah,
Because, like, if we did it the way we did mental health care, it'd be like, well, we're really sorry to inform you that you've got a cancer diagnosis. We recommend you see an oncologist. There is a 6-month waiting list to get seen. And you'd be like, okay, well,
yeah.
like, in the meantime, what do you
What are you
do?
gonna do? I mean, yeah, I mean, a level 3 sarcoma is a big deal, but like you could have a level 3 mental health issue, and it could cascade, and then society sees this sometimes when things bubble up, and people didn't take care of things,
Hmm.
and you have these, like, it becomes like an explosion. It's like suddenly it's a real big deal, but you didn't think it was a deal
Hmm.
just because you can't chart it and you can't see on a scan. You can see my level 3 sarcoma. You can physically see it. I think like technology now can scan the brain and can see issues that they can start to understand and start to map. But it's not at the level of the sarcoma. The sarcoma, like they
Hmm.
know, they know what that is. And so I think
Well,
that it needs to be treated like with the same weight.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and one of the strange things about depression is like there's technically the same way as there's multiple types of cancer, there's multiple types of depression. Like we know some can be caused by chemical imbalances in the brain, some are caused by like the actual structure of the brain being, messed up or altered, but like it's really hard to tell. And then like if you know which kind, you can treat it better, right? Because
Hmm.
if it's a chemical issue, well, yes, meds will be super helpful. Hopefully, super helpful. Meds will be more likely to be helpful. If it's not a chemical issue, medication might not do much. So if we could like, but insurance won't pay for brain scans or anything. I know that they've done studies where they can see some brain structures
Yeah.
changing based on depression, which is pretty wild.
But this is where we got to start valuing. Like a lot of times, our healthcare is based on not preventative, but kind of
Mhm.
reactive.
For sure.
And Western medicine, the U.S. has a lot of bad outcomes through all the tech we have across the board. And when you go to other countries that have a more preventative mindset, or an idea that it's not just it is a right that human beings should get care, then they
Mhm.
have a different mindset. And so, like when you act like it's like, oh, you can only get it through if you have a job, that's not always the best, overall remedy for society. Like if you look
Mhm.
at, a lot of times we don't look at the societal impact. We're so into individualism, so into like those things. I don't want to get on the soapbox, but I think it is a symptom of why things aren't valued.
For sure. Well, and it doesn't help, right, that there's still such a stigma in our society with mental health. I like to say that we're a little bit more accepting of depression and anxiety now. Those are the socially acceptable mental illnesses, right? And then we've got, stuff like bipolar or schizophrenia or these kind of more intense,
Hmm.
um, for anyone listening to audio only, I'm using air quotes here, the more intense mental illnesses that we don't understand and that we associate with, well, this person's going to have a psychotic break and hurt people. Well, if we look at statistics, the majority of people with mental illness are far more likely to be victimized than to be victimizers. It
Yeah.
just, those are not really the cases that we see in the news. They're not the ones that get hyped up. So instead, we go, oh, this person has mental illness. That's scary because it's not
Yeah.
something that I can kind of understand.
In the tools, sometimes the first people to get on the scene are law enforcement, and they're not always the best equipped to deal
Mhm.
with a mental health episode. There's been a lot of advocates that say, there's a lot of people who have been unnecessarily injured because the people first on the scene don't understand the situation they're in. Not to put down all police, but if a police officer gets into a situation, he only has certain tools, right? And he may be not trained to know how to de-escalate. And so they go for what they know how to do,
Mhm.
and then they end up hurting people. And
Yeah.
that's not exactly what should be done. When you're showing the statistic is they're not really going to hurt you. But if you have a bad perception, I was a sociology major, it's all about like perception and reality.
Mhm.
And so the cop comes into a situation and the tool he has is a tool that's going to cause injury. Well, then that's not going to be a good outcome versus somebody that's more of a social worker. They can read the scene and kind of de-escalate the scene and not necessarily take it to the ninth level.
Right. Well, the crazy thing to me too is I see like that this happens in healthcare as well. If you have healthcare professionals who aren't trained specifically in kind of mental illness and psychology and stuff like that. So, for example, my mom is a nurse. She works mainly with like cardiovascular stuff. And literally, my first panic attack that I had, she was like kind of escalating it by yelling at me. And so, I mean, I was like 14 or 15, right? So keep in mind, my reaction
Mm-hmm.
is not just somebody having a panic attack, but it's somebody who's not even got a fully matured brain, who's just thinking, "I gotta get out of
Yeah,
here."
young person.
So
Yeah, young person. It's
right,
not
right.
fully. Yeah, you haven't fully
Mhm.
developed, so you don't have all the tools.
Right, so I ran out of the house and I hid behind a bush to try and hide from her so I could calm down and breathe, and she chased me, she found me, and she was like, "You can breathe just fine. Just breathe." And, like,
That's
she's
not
much
going to help
better.
you.
Yeah, she's much better than that now, especially if she listens to this, which I'm sure she will. She is fully on my side with advocating for mental health and tells everybody she meets about, my journey and the treatment that I've had and how helpful it was because it doesn't get a lot of publicity, transcranial magnetic stimulation. But, she that was her initial response. She's like a fixer and she was like, something's wrong. I've got to fix it. And so I just think like if somebody who worked in healthcare, who was also my mom, who clearly was not wanting to escalate the situation, that was her
Still
response to
did.
me having a panic
Yeah,
attack. Yeah, how different is it when you're in charge of keeping everybody else safe? You don't know the person, you don't know if they're violent, you know what I mean? Like, that to me was a
yeah,
well, I guess it wasn't at the time a big eye-opening experience, but, like, with hindsight, it's very much a, "Oh, if this can be best of intentions with someone you love, the response, how much can things change when we take away a bunch of these factors?" And so it doesn't
yeah.
really even matter if
It's
they're to have the best of intentions, it's still so easy to go wrong.
yeah. It's just a bad scenario. So you have a bad outcome. And this is why a
Mhm.
lot of advocates have been saying you kind of need like a whole level of people like if they identify the incident as an incident that requires a social worker with a certain skill set rather than sending the SWAT team.
Right.
you're not
Right.
you're not gonna you get an escalation, it's gonna go bad. It's gonna go the wrong way. And a lot of times it's just not fair to the patient or the person. They end up becoming a victim and it's not necessary. And so a lot of times it's like because we don't value things and we don't put things in the right lens and we make a lot of assumptions and everybody knows what happens when you assume. But it's yeah, it's really bad, to have that. And I don't want to be so negative, but I think people do need to understand that we don't give it the same weight in the medical dollars spent, the access spent, the care options given, and I think we need more people to press our leaders that
Yeah,
this
for
needs to
sure.
be addressed. Yeah, it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, we had a major win recently with we finally have that crisis number. We've got 988. So just like you can call 911 if you have an emergency, now you can call 988 and get to the mental health crisis line anywhere in the United States, which was really
Well,
cool.
good.
I'd been following that for a while. And I don't know how it is in other states. I know in Washington, they did when the act got passed, they got together a committee to kind of talk about what implementation would look like in Washington as far as there was some other stuff that came with it, right, with the 988. So kind of trying
Right.
to improve behavioral
Hmm.
health responses. And one of the things I really loved that they did was they had a specific subcommittee that was the lived experience subcommittee. So they were like, if you have mental illness or you love someone with mental illness, whether you've been failed by the system or not, come tell us about it. Tell us what we can do better. Tell us how to fix it. And like that was like so incredible to see and to hear. And I was able to go to some of those meetings and then right, life got in the way. But I was able to go to some of those meetings and it wasn't, I
That's
guess
good.
yeah, I'm kind of a pessimist. So it's like it's gonna be lip service, but it was genuinely like they wanted to hear. Like one of my recommendations, I think, was, if you know someone's a veteran, don't auto route them to the Veterans Crisis Line, because that could be part of their trauma response, right?
Yeah, yeah, because it
Yeah,
can take forever.
right. Well, that too. So I was like, make it an option where they can, press it and do it or not. And so that probably, I'm sure that was not implemented because of me, but it's
No, it's
implemented, which
good to
is really cool.
have a voice, to have people who have experienced things actually be part of the solution, and also, get that out in the world. You can do the PSAs, get it on the internet, get it where people can see it. Because Amazon's throwing things telling you to buy something. We'll
Yeah.
do the PSA on social media. Wouldn't that be a good idea? It's like everybody's on TikTok, everybody's on Twitch, everybody's on all these channels. Have the PSAs coming through where people are. They're not just on TV anymore. There's a
Yeah.
whole
Well,
generation of people that are on these other platforms. Maybe the PSAs need to go to those platforms.
yeah, I will say a lot of our tech companies have actually, from my point of view, done some really cool stuff. So, like, Facebook has a thing where if you see a post, someone post that's concerning, you can click, I think this person needs help, and your name's not necessarily attached, but Facebook will
Oh,
send a
that's cool.
message going, someone's worried about you. Here are some resources. And I've accidentally triggered, I was I was doing a Halloween, setting up a Halloween game that was like charades, but different ways that people die. And I didn't think about it. And I Googled like ways to die, which then
Oh,
Google gave me the like suicide crisis line. They were like, hey, you sound like you need help.
give me
Which
up, yeah.
Right, which but, like, is super cool because, like, I think about when I must have been 16 because I could drive. I was 16, and I remember specifically having a really bad night and feeling really suicidal, and I looked up my medication that I was on, and I was like, "Dosage required to die." There was no
Oh,
suicide crisis
there's
line
nothing
that
back
popped
then to
up.
check that. Yeah,
No.
there's nothing. Yeah, it's the algorithms are good now, where
Yeah.
they have AI embedded in some of it, and it's able to kind of make decisions about what's going on and actually provide options and responses, and that's really cool. That we can do that. I just think, yeah. I mean, when I was talking about the PSA, I think it's just in the same kind of mode, and we kind of grew up with a lot of PSAs that people kind of went, yeah, well, I don't know. We had like the Nancy Reagan PSAs. You're like, okay, well, a lot of people just blew by those. It's like forget that. But they can still be valuable. Yeah, you can
Yeah.
still actually
I mean, I
influence
still
if they're
remember the
done
ones from when I
right.
was a kid.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff that you can do, and but what's interesting is like your whole story, your journey. We've been kind of talking about it around the edges, but like one of the things that you like to answer is like what kept you alive when you felt like bad, just as a kind of story to tell people so they can have like understand that.
Yeah, I honestly, it's kind of crazy because I feel like it's really overstated. People are like, just take it one day at a time. And you're like, cool, I'll take it one day of misery at a time. Thanks for the advice. Really appreciate it. But there was a point in my life truly where, I was always really focused on getting my education, and specifically I went to school for education because I always wanted to teach. And I also had, every lesson that I did, I put something about mental health in, which I actually got critiqued about that one time. My professor was like, yeah, but it doesn't really address the standards, does it? And I was like, it addresses the English standards while talking about mental health. Go bother
Yeah,
somebody else. Leave me alone. But,
yeah,
because part of it was,
professors.
yeah. So, like, in my head at the time, and this feels like probably a roundabout way to answer the question, but that's kind of my MO. So I promise I have a point. But at the time, I was like, the majority of lifelong mental illnesses appear around middle school age. Middle school's always been the age I felt most comfortable teaching. I've taught middle school, high school. I don't teach elementary school because I subbed like second grade one time and a kid sneezed in my mouth and I was done. That was it for me. But so like as I was going to school for education, I was very focused on like, this is what I'm going to do once I have my education. And so holding on to like having that life goal was really helpful. But then, it's also very far away, right? Because you're like, okay, well, yeah, once I get a job, after I graduate, after I finish this class, and then do the other class. And then, so 4 years from now, I'll be happy, right? So I got to a point where one of the tools I was
Hmm.
doing was rather than taking things one day at a time, I was literally taking things like one task at a time. And I mean, like, legitimately, I would say to myself, All right, you're going to walk to the median. Okay, great. You're at the median. Now you're going to walk the rest of the way. Okay, now you're in front of the building. Okay, now all we have to focus on is walking through the doors. Okay, we've walked through the doors. We're going to hit the elevator button. And it's like having, and I don't think I've said this yet today, but I consider my depression to be in remission. And I'll talk a little bit why I use that label later on. But one of the things that now having my depression in remission, I look back on that and I can't fathom taking life that chunked up and that slowly, but it was really one of the things that I had to do to survive. I would do that.
It was a tool.
Honest
You had a tool.
Yeah.
You found a tool, and I think it's a good idea because I think a lot of people they try to take the whole thing, right?
Mhm.
And I've been with people like I'm a musician, right? And so like you could look at a whole project, you could look at the whole album, 10 songs,
It's so
where you could get
overwhelming.
yeah, where you could just look at the one song and maybe just the chorus of that song or just the
Mhm.
hook of that song, and you could have a win. But if you're saying the only win is I got to finish 10 songs in like 3 days, then you put so much pressure that you don't have to do that, right? You can take things into chunks, bite-sized chunks, things that are actually doable,
Mhm.
and quit feeling like you're failing. Because if you put all kinds of goals there, you're not going to be able to do it, right? And you know you can't do it. And
Yeah.
so if you go and put things in front of you that you continually fail, then what's going to happen? You're going to get depressed. You're probably not going to even finish it. It's
Yeah,
better
and
to
then
have the
having not
incremental.
finished it then feeds into that, right? Now I didn't finish it, so I'm depressed, and now I've been putting it off because it's too big of a task, so now I'm more depressed. That happens to me
Yeah,
with
it's just
cleaning a
it's
lot.
just like it's a tool. It's a tool to like and so many people want like you get the 12-step program or you get the diet and you got these steps. Somebody hits step 5 and then they fall off.
Mhm.
They're all done, right? You don't have to be all done. You can learn how to kind of riff on something and learn how to deal with the happy accident or the issue that you didn't quite hit, but you're trying, so you don't have to give up. It's like a jazz musician hit the wrong note. A lot of us will say there are no bad notes. There are
Mhm.
opportunities. So if I hit the wrong key, we can actually take that and take the song somewhere else. Instead of saying we messed up and we got to start all over again, we can
I
kind of
love
live in
that.
the moment and go from there. And it's a different mindset. And
It
once you
is I
start
think
doing that,
especially I have a very anxious brain and it's very perfectionism centered, right? So I'm like, "Oh, no, that wasn't supposed to be there." Complete like, I've 100% ripped off a sheet of paper and started rewriting everything completely because, like, I didn't dot my I, right, you know? So I think,
mhm,
yeah, embracing those imperfections is really helpful. Easier said than done sometimes, but really helpful. But I think also, yeah, looking at they say growth isn't linear, and that's true. It's annoying, but it's true. And I think sometimes those moments of what feel like backsliding are really great ways to see how far you've come, right? Because you're like, "Oh, no, I've slid back. I'm so" but if you
yeah,
really look behind you, you're still so much further than you started.
yeah, it's like a wave. It's like the
Mhm,
peaks and valleys. And a lot of times, like sometimes, like as an artist, you have a zenith, and then you come down, and then you have another peak, but it never hits what the other peak was. And so you can, as an artist, like and even in everyday life, this happens. You don't always hit that zenith point. You don't always like everything fire and you hit that on the mark. Sometimes you get real close,
mhm,
and sometimes you don't. And it's not like if you have an artist, right, you get this moment where you have this big single, right, you sell 2 million, right, then like the next thing you do, it's highly likely you're not going to hit that again right
mhm.
off the bat. It's probably going to drop. Now, do you totally stop because you don't hit
Quit
that 2
while you're ahead.
million, or do you continue because you love the music? Did you love the music only when you hit 2 million, or do you love music because you like to play the keys?
Mhm.
And then it happens that people find those keys interesting and they buy it, or but do you still play the keys regardless? And so look at why did you do it. You find out why you have the joy in doing something rather than like is it somebody else's expectation of what you're doing, or do you love what you're doing?
Well, and it's funny
And
because
then
that
people
to
come
me is the
along.
difference. Yeah, that's the difference between survival and living, right? Survival is doing what you need to do to keep going. Living is finding joy in the moments that you're alive. And, I think that's really hard to do sometimes and for some people. And
Yeah,
like,
it's hard. It's hard because like you put so many expectations on yourself. A lot of
yeah.
times people are like, they're in that kind of idea of like imposter syndrome.
Hmm.
Like they don't believe they can do it. I've run into artists, they're brilliant, and you wouldn't even know from their stage presence that they're so full of fear. And then
Yeah.
I'm like, and then you meet them and you're working with them on a song, and it's like, wow, they got a lot of hesitation. They got a lot of like they second guessing and they're not trusting themselves. And then as a producer, kind of like a teacher, he's like, I try to get somebody to trust their gut
Hmm.
and trust that instinct and then go with what I think and then try to make it sound better. And not really try to make them feel like they gotta sound like somebody else and try to make them sound like them. And then get them to believe that they made those decisions, but I'm kind of edging them toward those decisions that they make.
Like inceptioning them.
Yeah. Because if you feel you came up with it, then you're probably going to really go with it, But
You know,
if you feel I told you to do it, then maybe you're not going to do it.
I actually did that to myself when I was in college. When I was not like when I was having one of my better days, I wrote this like note about like, yeah, times will be better, and all you just have to do is hold on, and like, because I was feeling really positive, and I had probably just gotten out of therapy, so I had like a lot of therapy quotes, and I sent it to my mom, and I was like, send this to me sometime. Like, I forgot about it. And like 6 months later, I was like, I want to kill myself. And she was like, hold on. And I was like, what do you mean,
Here's
hold
a
on? Like,
nugget
are you
that you
driving to
had.
Indiana? Yeah. And she sent me the text. I was like, oh, past me was looking out.
Yeah. Well, I think like you have to kind of look, the poets always talk about this looking glass.
Hmm.
And what is that? Like that's looking at you and it's like other you. And this other you, they're trying to reconcile in all their deep poetry. And I was reading, used to get into Wordsworth and Tennyson and Blake and all these guys. And what it was always this common element is like they were dealing with that kind of self analysis and then
Hmm.
figuring out how to express it as art. And I felt like, well, a singer songwriter, that's what I do. I take moments, and it's very cathartic for me to take something that could be very melancholy, could be funky or frenetic and happy, but it's whatever it is, and take that feeling and turn it into art. And for me, the process of doing that gives me joy, regardless if anybody listens to it or not.
That's
And so I
exactly
just
how I
use that
feel.
as a method, like art therapy, to get through things. And the keys help me get through, whether anybody was listening to my keys or not.
Hmm. They actually have music therapy too. I'm on the wait list for it, but because I started my own music therapy. That's why I started writing songs. I like just, it was the only way sometimes the feelings would come out. And I learned guitar just so I could play along to my songs, but I'm like, don't have the voice to actually sing to them. So we're just hoping someday somebody wants to sing them.
What I like about the art forms of like music and poetry is like it's not like being a novelist. You can get something that's really in your heart and get it out into the open without having to have all that goes into being like a novelist or something. It's
Hmm.
like it doesn't require, it can require, you can go real far and say, hey, it's got to be that detailed. But if you get into it just for like a therapeutic exercise, you can kind of just be in this flow state and just let yourself represent what you felt at that moment, which is kind of like the art therapy kind of idea where you're not, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to compare it to anybody. It's just what you're feeling.
Yeah, it's crazy too, because like then we go back to society, right? Because I feel like society has such a focus on like if you're gonna spend time doing something, like it needs to be worth other people liking it too. Like maybe it's
Yeah.
okay for just me to like it. Maybe that's
Yeah.
allowed.
Yeah. And a lot of times where you'd be surprised that the thing that you don't think works, right? People love it. There's a lot of work I've worked with, a lot of artists that the thing they thought was not going to be commercial or work or isn't what's happening was the thing that was them. And then it resonated with a lot of people, but nobody knows it resonates unless you put it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times, like I've run into people that they make that movement. It's like they become their own boss. They create their own business. They put that thing out there. It's the same idea. It's like if you're a poet, that creative spark you put out there, you don't know if people are going to like it, and they're haters. They'll say they hate everything,
Yeah.
right? And so, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't resonate with somebody, right? And so that's the part that's hard for people to believe. Like they don't want to believe they can actually be good because they have to be Mozart, or they have to be
Mm-hmm.
Wordsworth, or they've got to be Thoreau. And he's like, you don't have to be those people. You can just be you.
I feel like there's so much power in what other people say that we like so often just kind of ignore our own voice and just start listening to other people's. And
Mm,
I mean, I guess I've never been neurotypical. So I don't know how neurotypical people experience that, but I feel like that's something that always was really difficult for me when I was in the depths of my depression, that I feel like I do better
mhm.
now. But like all it took, was that one criticism. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm crap. I can't do this. Like, and it wasn't even
Yeah,
somebody whose opinion I cared about, really. It was like someone I'd never met before, and I was like, and who's like not in whatever I'm doing, right? But they're like, yeah, I didn't like
yeah,
it. And I'm like, well, I'm never going to be good at this. Like, come on.
yeah. Yeah, it's always the rub to me because I run into people that have all this work. And I ran to this painter, and I'm not a painter, but I was checking out their work. And I said, did you take this to a gallery? No, I'm not ready. And it's like hundreds of paintings in this place in his loft. And I'm like, this stuff is amazing. But it wasn't up to his critical
Hmm.
approval. So he was like, it was in that kind of self-limiting imposter syndrome. And it really, it's hard to get somebody to know when they're ready to come out of that.
Hmm.
And eventually some people they hit it and some people don't. But I think it's just sad that society has so many people who don't even do anything near what that person was doing to make him feel that he couldn't even present it. And
Right.
that's just a shame because I think there's just so much that we as human beings can share. And that's why I do the podcast, is the oral sharing of experiences, which I think people should hear because it's unique to every person.
Yeah, it really helps build empathy too. That's what I kind of love about the internet too. It's like gone are the days where you had to have some like big money bags guy behind you sponsoring your stuff. Like I have a SoundCloud
Yeah,
account where I put out my songs that I don't think are good enough, but I put them there anyways because I put a lot of work into them. Maybe somebody will like them. Like it's who cares if nobody likes it, right? Put it out because it makes you happy. And honestly, like, and maybe this is my view because I've done so much speaking about mental health before, but like you have no idea what that one thing is that you share is going to like make everything fall into place for somebody else,
yeah.
change their life perspective. I I did, like, when I was in college, I put a YouTube video out of myself having a panic attack, which sounds really absurd, but because I was trying to explain to someone what panic attacks were, but I couldn't find anyone who like really showed what it looked like at that time. And
Oh
so I
wow.
had like this crazy idea and did it before I even thought about it. I like felt that I was about to have a panic attack. I turned my camera on and then promptly forgot about it and
You
had a
thought,
panic attack.
oh,
Yeah, and, then one of my students that I was working with, like, a couple months later was like, "This girl put a YouTube video." It was a blind school, so they couldn't see me. They've
but they
transitioned
heard it.
since they were in school. Yeah, but they heard it. They were like, "This really brave person put this video on YouTube," and I was like, "Ha, ha, ha," because I thought they were, like, teasing me, and they were like, "Why is that funny to you?" And I was like, "'Cause it's me," and they were like, oh, I showed my
Oh
mom so
wow.
she would understand what a panic attack was. But so, like, I don't know, that was a incredibly validating experience of just, and usually you don't ever see or hear the result, right? But to just
Yeah.
know, like, I did this thing that felt really dumb in the moment that I still don't even feel like was necessarily a wise decision, but it was really impactful for
But
somebody
it
else.
resonated. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what you don't know. It's like a lot of times as a creator, you have no idea. Like a lot of times we're so self-critical of our own stuff, and we don't see how anybody could ever value it. And then you find when you throw it on the wall, you put it on a SoundCloud, you put it on TikTok, you put it on a reel, you put it out in your short. and then it resonates with somebody. And sometimes it's like people say, well, you got to get a million views. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not necessarily true, because I had a situation where I had an episode maybe got 30 views. And then a Grammy Award winning producer saw it. And then I was able to get them on the show, and I got to talk to them, and I talked to them like twice.
Oh, that's so
So
cool.
the lesson there is like the number isn't representative of the quality or the connections that you can make. And so just because you don't get a million views doesn't mean that it's not impactful. If the right person sees it, you can get a connection, and you'd be surprised.
For sure. I would even go beyond like creative people. I think just like in your daily conversations, I mean, I think about like, I'm thinking social justice now, but like you think about, you hear a racist or homophobic joke or whatever. And yeah, it would be a lot easier to just not say anything. But maybe, you feel like you can say something and it's not perfect, but you're like, hey, that wasn't okay with me. You have no idea how impactful that is for
Hmm.
the person sitting there who didn't feel like they could say anything because they didn't want to be that person, that minority that was saying something about it.
Yeah. When you advocate, yeah, if you're empathetic and you have an opinion and you put something out there, and there's a whole idea, like there's social justice, there's empathy, there's understanding, there's just having a voice for the
Hmm.
voiceless, right? So if you put your voice as a person and you put your opinion, it's a valid, you're a human being, you got a right to have an opinion about something. People can disagree. And that's what the public square is. Like, this is the virtual public square, and you can go out and make your statement, and people could agree with it or disagree with it, or say,
Hmm.
maybe you should think about it this way. It's like when you're in college and you're talking in class, where you have a
Yes.
debate society, and you actually treat people with respect and say, yeah, this is my point of view. You don't have to kill, you have to like try to tear somebody down, but just come at it and listen to it, and then provide feedback, and it can be constructive. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a really good thing. It's just like people take everything personal.
Yeah.
So then if you put something out there knowing that if somebody doesn't like it, that doesn't necessarily mean they don't like you. Right? That doesn't mean that you don't have to take everything that happens personal. As a songwriter, like, somebody hates my work, it's like, oh, am I going to take that and go really, really down? Like, if, yeah, when I was younger, maybe I would. I get older, I say, this rolls off. You go to the next thing. That guy didn't like it, but some other guy liked it. You know, Pitchfork liked it. Pitchfork didn't like it. Rolling Stone loved it. Who cares? It's like, it's whoever who likes
Yeah.
it.
Well, and I also think too, like, you know, because we're all so different in the way we think about things and express things is so different. Like, I think specifically in terms of mental health, obviously, because that's kind of what we've been talking about. But like, like I said, my mom did not get it. She did not get it for a really long time. And, the thing that made her get it was not like I couldn't have told you what was going to make her get it. I felt like I had told her 50,000 things that should have made her get it. But the thing that
That's
made her
why I
get it was
clicked.
not any of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And same for a bunch of like I did one of the things I did in college was the Facing Project, which is run by Kelsey Timmerman and J.R. Jameson. And they're I call them Indiana celebrities because I feel like they were famous when I was in college, but the rest of the world doesn't really know them. It was just in Indiana. But so they did a thing on facing depression. So the way that it works is like you are willing to share your story, but you tell it to someone else writes it, and then somebody else performs it at a public thing. So it's your story that you've told,
Oh,
but written by somebody else and then performed by a third person. And I remember having like really major imposter syndrome doing it because a bunch of people, like once I got the book, a bunch of people were like, my struggle with my suicide attempts. And it's like, I've never attempted suicide. Like maybe that means I don't have depression, which like, first of all, to then be questioning whether or not you have depression based on someone else's experience is like the peak of having imposter syndrome. But and then I had who actually one of my professors, she hadn't even realized it was me because it was like a giant lecture class, but she came up to me and she was like, I thought the others were impactful and like meaningful, but like I just couldn't relate to them. And it wasn't until like they got to your story and you were just talking about like the daily grind of it, and it didn't have anything to do with a suicide attempt, that it just kind of made sense of how somebody could get there if every day is like this and this and this. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think it's very much everybody has something to say in their own unique way to say it, and somebody needs to hear it in that specific way. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
I
I
mean, you
think
don't
we
always,
silence our voices a lot. Don't do that, guys.
yeah. Yeah. We always don't get to the same spot time. I mean, I think people find their own speed in which they like understand things. Like, a lot of people are so immediate today. They think like,
Hmm.
you should just get it. But
Hmm.
you don't, it doesn't always just click. There are people, they're talking sideways, they're like not reaching, they're looking for immediate feedback. And sometimes people, what they do is like, a lot of people don't really listen.
Hmm.
That's like the core. So, so you get so many people talking and they're thinking about the next thing they're going to say, and they're not actually listening to what somebody just said. And so they're not fully actually processing. And so once you get to a point where you actually listen, and then you start to like not just think about the next thing you're going to say, but what did that person say? What did they mean? Can I ask them to elaborate? Can I, instead of challenging them and being argumentative, that's what, it takes a different type of mindset. You have to kind of go into more of a holistic empathy, not just thinking you want to win.
Yeah.
That if you all you want to do is win that discussion, and that's your way of processing it, then you're probably not getting what was said.
Yeah, it's like, what are you willing to sacrifice in the pursuit of being right?
Yeah.
A
And so
lot of people
like
are willing to sacrifice understanding.
yeah, I mean, it's like there's so many people that will read something, and then you put it down, and then they didn't actually get the meaning. Like, we had exercises in school, and in like our some of our classes, like in political science. I was a sociology and political science double major, and we put down like like a statement, like an elevator pitch, and then people would like totally misread what our intention was, and the professor would go and say, "See, that didn't work. Like, you were trying to get people to poll this way, but the way you asked the question, or the way you
That's
put,
so
put, put
cool.
the statement, you didn't actually get the answer." So we started to actually really look at what are you actually saying, and what do you think you're going to get back. And in political science, we would run polls, and we could see what people were actually getting out of what we were saying. And then you're like, wow, they're not getting it. They're not getting what we thought they were going to get, because we didn't really think about how we said it. And
They
then it
should do
becomes
that for
very,
teachers. We should have
yeah,
that class.
it's very important when you start to actually get to quantify it. Not that you have to quantify it, but you start to really analyze things like social sciences with some mathematics of actually like, did they really get that? Did they really
Hmm.
perceive that? But they didn't. And it's really how you say something, and how it comes across. People get surprised, about like the miscommunication that happens daily, and
Well,
the
then you get so
misfires.
frustrated. You're like,
Yeah,
I just said this. I couldn't have been more clear. And the other person's like, I just heard you say this totally different thing. You couldn't
yeah.
have been more clear.
It's perception. I mean, I took a philosophy class too, and we're going into Nietzsche and Sartre, and they dive into that even more. Like the political science was at the mathematical side of it, but then the philosophy was like, oh, this is the other side of it. This is the more kind of arty side of it. It's like into the like going into these ideas like, oh, the tree falls in the forest. Did you hear it or did you not hear it? These perceptions of like, the Overman and the Superman. Like, how do you get people to perceive that? And then you get in these ideas, and it just becomes really interesting. And as a songwriter, then a lot of times we put things out there because it's a personal experience. But once we give it to the world, it's the audience owns it.
Hmm.
And I know there's some songwriters that get really frustrated that the audience didn't actually hear what they were saying. but most of the time people don't hear what they
Oh my
they
gosh.
they, they take in their own experience and say that's what it meant.
Ben Fold. I don't know if you're familiar with Ben Folds at all, but he
Yeah,
has
Ben
this.
Folds is awesome.
Okay, so on his newest album, he has the song Christine from the 7th grade, which is like stellar and it like just hilarious, but in like, we've all lived through a really tough time, hilarious. And I guess he was talking about, he played it, hit his goal. I full disclaimer, I do not know Ben Folds, although Ben Folds, if you're listening, I would love to know you. Hit me up. So he was playing it at like this highbrow thing. I don't remember where it was. It was somebody, some people that were rich and famous were there, right? Or maybe at least just rich. And so they're all laughing. And his goal with the song had been to kind of bring these two sides that were very opposing of like, the far right essentially and the far left that just can't ever seem to get along on the internet and are posting these crazy things to kind of bring some empathy to that. But then he's like singing the parts about the far right and his audience was laughing. And he was like, I have to take a little bit of ownership over that because yeah, the audience will make what it makes, but as the person who put the words out there, I have some responsibility to make sure that it's perceived in the way that it, like, I wanted it to be. If it was perceived completely different than how I wanted it to be, I clearly did something a little bit wrong. And I was just like, that was so, like, I don't know. I guess I would never have thought, like, most people would dig in their heels and be like, no, it was clear that I meant whatever.
Yeah. Well, he's a really interesting songwriter. I love his piano. He's a very much of a guy that like to attack the piano.
Yes.
With a kind of a punk aesthetic. And actually, really kind of, I'm a piano player myself, and I was always very enamored by his approach, which is kind of having a punk aesthetic with the jazz and classical capabilities of a songwriter, but actually, to actually hit it hard to represent kind of feeling, and actually, cool. and then be able to kind of, come away from that. So some of his stuff can get really into cacophony and dissonance, and it gets really beautiful. Then it goes off. It can be very harsh. It can be kind of really beautiful. He has a lot of dynamics.
Oh, and he loves doing the beautiful instrumental with like lyrics that don't seem like they match whatsoever, which is totally my
duality.
Thing.
Well, that's a duality. There's an interesting thing in music where you can have something really pretty and then have something that's not so pretty. It either could be the lyrics or the music, and you can switch them. You can go back and forth with this thing where it's like you could have this really funky, beautiful funky song, but then it's like super morbid or something. And you're like, the lyrics are not matching the beat. And it's a technique to kind of give some weight to what you're doing, but it's like different artists have that duality in their work in different ways, but I always appreciate it when people do that.
Oh yeah, so he's one of the ones that kept me alive too. Just to touch back on that real quick, his music was one of those things that kept me alive.
Well, the Ben Folds 5, that's a big influence for me. And I think like a lot of times people don't, understand the influence. It's like, I think one time, the Counting Crows mentioned his name. Like, really? And he kind of it was really interesting. And this is kind of like a thing that happens in music. Sometimes like a band that's big has influences that aren't as big, right? And so there's a kind of history that with like Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground. They were known to have influenced almost all the independent songwriters in the 80s and 90s. Like big band from Smashing Pumpkins to Pearl Jam would always name check the Velvet Underground as being a big influence, like Wilco. All these bands would say like Lou inspired them. And at the time the Velvets were around in the 60s, like 66, they weren't commercially successful at all. But almost everybody who bought their records became a producer or became a bigger band. And so it's an interesting thing. It's kind of like Counting Crows was kind of doing that kind of situation with Ben Folds, where they were really big with like Mrs. Jones and stuff, and then they mentioned like Ben Folds in one of their songs. It's actually in one of their songs. And I actually got into Ben Folds because the lead singer of the Counting Crows actually mentioned him in a song. I said, well, who's this guy? And then I went and started checking the catalog. This guy's phenomenal. And then I just, and it's cool to see influences and people realize that they should kind of lift all boats. There was this kind of thinking back, and I don't know if people were into it, and now they're all about like saying I'm awesome.
Yeah, well, it's like I can't promote someone else's stuff.
Yeah, what's wrong with like saying this guy's cool, check him out,
Yeah.
and putting in a song and like it kind of it's like it's hidden but not hidden. But yeah, I think it's just I always divert, but like one of the things like we've been in talking about podcasts, we're on a podcast, and
Yeah.
I really love podcasting as a way to have this connection with people that's longer than like 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 90 seconds, which is like today's world is so into these fast things that these longer form discussions have to me been very vital to my own life.
Yeah, I am a recent convert to podcasting. I've always been like a podcast listener. And like some people are like I mostly listen to true crime podcasts, so like there's two
Hmm.
very clear like camps in that where they're either like we love the banter with our true crime or cut the banter, get to the true crime. Like I'm not here to listen to your jokes, right? And people are like really intense on those, but I've always loved like listening to the banter and listening to the true crime angle. But it's cool too because podcasting is another one of those angles. I think especially if like you're not somebody who either enjoys music or who can you know sing or write or play. I think probably everybody can to some extent. But if you don't feel like that's your skill set, right, podcasting is a great way to connect with the world around you. And I and then I guess I always felt like there was this big barrier to podcasting. Like it was like other people are podcasters, but I couldn't do it. So when I finally got into it, I was amazed
You
by
can do
how
it,
actually simple it was to
yeah.
just get on
It's this.
Spotify and put one out there.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on since 2016. It used to be just on a phone, right? And it would just be on a phone. It was on an app called Spearman, and I just go and interview somebody, and it would just go out on audio and be on that platform, and maybe we push it to YouTube. And then, just in 2020, we started doing video because some of the tools got better. And as a musician, I
Hmm.
had all these tools. I said, why not use the videos, cameras I have? Why not use the mixers I have? Why not use the mics I have? And level up and do better. And so I started, presenting a little bit higher quality than what I had done before. And it opened up a whole different world. And initially, we were only talking to musicians. Then we talked to poets. Then we talked to filmmakers. Then we talked to photographers. It was all creators. And then we said, well, you know what? CEOs, people who create their own businesses, they're creative too. And then
Hmm.
therapists. Well, all musicians usually use the music as therapy, so we can talk to therapists and life coaches from that kind of angle. And we just became very expansive. And it just, people say, well, how can you talk to so many different types of people? I said, well, I treat it like it's like me going to school. I got over 1,000 hours of talking to people, and it's actually building up. For me, it's like that 1,000 hours of talking to people helps me, and then maybe it helps somebody else. And so, because I enjoy it, that's why I do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say, I think I would enjoy podcasting a little bit more right now if my schedule wasn't so busy. Because I've decided to podcast on top of working two jobs. So, that's
Oh, that's hard.
real easy. Yeah. Yeah. But I say my podcast, in case anybody's interested, is the Stand Our Ground podcast. It's a true crime podcast investigating my cousin's murder. She was murdered in 2017 in the Pensacola, Florida area, and it was ruled self-defense using the Stand Your Ground law. But
Oh, wow.
the sheriff's office that investigated it was also the former employer of one of the people involved in the shooting.
Oh,
Um, and there's a lot of stuff that is kind of interesting that I'm finding out. Like I was able to interview on my podcast the coworker and friend that she spent her last night with before she went to the location where she was killed. And I was literally the first person to interview him about it. Like the police didn't reach out to him. Nobody contacted, which is just
oh, that's
insane to me
interesting.
that that wouldn't happen. So the podcast has been a really great way of like not just connecting people to my cousin's story, but also getting some more connection to my cousin and being able to feel like I'm doing something for her because we didn't live nearby. So I didn't get to spend a lot of time with her, and I won't get to spend a lot of time with her anytime soon. So
But I think it's really awesome how true crime podcast or document people who document things seem to find that sometimes the authorities have not done a very good job of what actually occurred. And sometimes they seem to
Hmm.
have conflicts of interest. I was watching something about this famous Australian situation at an amusement park. It was like a fire, and they come to find out that these young kids got killed in this amusement park ride called the Ghost Train. And they end up when the people started uncovering that true crime issue of this arson, found
Uh-huh.
out that the government and like one of the people on the high court in Australia and a prime minister were involved with this mobster that covered up the arson, and the arson was done so the guy could take the amusement park over and put casino in.
My
And
goodness.
so these people died, and initially the police had said it was just an electrical fault.
Hmm.
And then when they really started diving into it, they come to find out there are all these things where the police didn't investigate, they didn't look, didn't do this, didn't do that, didn't they? And it just like somebody had the passion over 20 years to go back and to
Hmm.
look at the incident and bring out the truth. And so I do like to watch things that are like true crime like that, where you see the passion of the people involved. They get really into uncovering like what actually was going on. What are the facts? What are these things? Where did they talk to this person? Did they not talk? Like when you mentioned, like people start to talk to people and find out
Yep.
the police didn't talk to this person. It's
Hmm.
like why not?
Yeah, like come on, guys. And I will say, I think it's definitely, or I hope, maybe I hope more than I think, but that it's one of those situations the same as like, we talked about the situations where people with mental illness are violent. Those are the ones that we hear about and that show up on the news. Would really like to hope that that's the same thing that we see with, some of these situations that get covered up. But I also think it really sucks because we deserve to be able to trust the police and to feel safe. And the police really can only do their jobs very well if we trust them. So, whoever these people are that keep covering stuff up, cut it out because you're making the rest of you really look bad and making it hard for everybody to do
But
their jobs.
yeah, sometimes but sometimes it seems like it's nefarious, and then sometimes it's just like they're not skilled enough to do their job, and
Mhm.
you assume they were gonna do a job, and then sometimes you find out in some cases like they bungled it. Like
Yeah.
there's like the yogurt store killing. There's this thing about this famous yogurt store where these girls got killed, and it seemed like the police kept on bungling the interviews. They were like messing up the interviews and doing like bad policing, like this bad, like making missteps. And then people kind of going and checking it. And it wasn't like they were nefarious. They were just doing things wrong because they just weren't skilled enough. They didn't
Yeah.
have a background in murder investigation. They didn't think that maybe bringing somebody from another department that had more experience. So they started making mistakes that were like fundamental mistakes that screwed up the case. And you're like,
And you know
okay.
what? That brings us that brings us to
It's
what
like
I think is the key
that
thing
kind
of
of thing.
humanity. Ask for help. It's okay to ask for help, no matter who you are.
Yeah, yeah. I think some people they make big mistakes when they think they can do something. It's like it's good to know what you don't know and to
Mhm.
admit that you don't know and go find somebody that does know.
Yes.
Because some people sometimes are dependent on you, or it would be better for you even like you realize that that you don't know this and maybe you need some help. There's nothing wrong with asking for help.
Mhm. And if you're too afraid to ask for help, I'm sure there is a podcast that deals with the topic that you need help with that you can find and listen to. Just make sure the person reporting on it is qualified and you're not like listening to like Aunt Sally talk about. This is what I always tell my students when I teach research. I'm like, yeah, maybe Aunt Sally happens to have studied this extensively, in which case she's a great source. But if you can't tell me that Aunt Sally has studied this or worked in it or knows about it somehow, you can't use Aunt Sally.
Yeah, maybe you should have some footnotes and some endnotes and some documents, that actually back up that's not just a feeling, that's
Mhm.
actually like evidence and facts, information, documented, things that you can point to rather than like, well, it's like Sally feels this. Okay, that's nice that she feels
Yeah.
that, but is that real? It's real for
Right,
her,
right,
but maybe it's not the fact.
right.
But yeah, thank you again for being on the show. It always goes like the way it goes, and we've actually hit like the hour mark, and it's always interesting to have people come on the show. I want people to again to check out your link tree. Uh, so Kiah Penfield, and when they click that, what will they find there? They can connect with you that way. They can find
Yeah,
your
so
social
they can
media there.
find, I think my LinkedIn is on there as well as, my Spotify. I know the podcast is on there. So it's it's really just a mass collection of different things that I've done that don't really
Your
seem
links.
connected otherwise. Yeah, because that's how my brain works.
Well, I think it's good because then people I like to check out the variety that people are into, and so your SoundCloud being there, your podcast being there, the other information is always helpful. I've always been very enamored with when I find that there's more multiple dimensions to people because a lot
Yeah,
of times
that's a good
people
point.
think they go they I think it's interesting. You find out somebody's a painter and they're a singer, or there's somebody likes to do something that you didn't know they did, right? And then you're like, wow, that's pretty cool, and to check it out. So I think yeah, it gives people a wider picture, and it's always interesting. So thank you for that, for giving us that. And I do encourage people to check it out. And I want to thank you for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really a pleasure, and I can't believe the hour's already up. It's like therapy. It goes so fast.
Yeah, I always feel like if it goes quick, then it's going well.
Yes.
So that's the way I hope I measure. But thank you very much for being here tonight, and we'll be getting this out to everybody on a landing page where they can check it out on whatever platform they like. That'll be available tomorrow. We'll be able to publicize that to your base. And thank you very much for being on the show again.
Awesome. Thank you, truly.